Welcome back to Mental Notes with Matt. Today, I'm joined by Ezra Dewolfe, founder of ADHD Tools, a platform that's helping thousands of people better understand their ADHD and channel it into growth, leadership, and creativity. His work stands out because it's not just about managing ADHD, it's about thriving with it, especially in professional and leadership contexts. As someone who's been diagnosed with ADHD myself, I know firsthand how powerful it can be to reframe challenges into strengths. I'm excited to dig into Ezra's story, the creation of ADHD Tools, and the strategies that have helped him and so many others. So welcome, Ezra. Thank you again so much for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. So I guess let's start off with, what inspired you to create ADHD Tools? And I guess let us know what that is.
Yeah. So for me, it's personal. So what I do in our company is we help late diagnosed and identified adults who learn they have ADHD later in life, sort of more like lean into their strengths, overcome their weaknesses, and specifically in a business context. We have a lot of creative types, a lot of entrepreneurial types amongst folks with ADHD. And what we help them do is to sort of like really lean into that potential of like maybe they've gone through the whole, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of their life not knowing. And now that they do, how do they make the most of this? What do we actually need to do specifically?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think it's very common. I think especially nowadays, 20, 30 years ago, I don't know necessarily that there was a lot of people being formally diagnosed, but as I was saying to you before we started recording, I've always had my suspicions growing up that maybe I was affected in some way with impulsivity or attention deficit. So I found it very, very comforting, but at the same time, a little bit devastating, if I'm being honest,
Yeah.
kind of getting that diagnosis, because the implications of that made me feel like, wow, I'm not normal, or I'm not,
Sure.
following the norms of society, or things will be a little bit more difficult for me. So I guess, was there a personal kind of turning point in your own journey with ADHD that led you to want to share tools publicly?
Yeah, I mean, part of it was just my own journey of actually trying to figure this out. So the journey that you've described so far is fairly typical of folks who learn about ADHD later in life. There can be sometimes a high of like, oh my God, for the first time, I have an explanation. And that feels so good, which is immediately preceded by the crash of, oh my God, but I still have all of these challenges. What am I going to do? Often as well, there can be some grief of the time that we've missed out on. There can be some frustration, both frustration in terms of trying to communicate our own lived experience with other folks and not quite having that understanding. And so for a lot of it for me came from navigating through those challenges myself, working, and then over time, as people were seeing changes in me, started asking like, okay, well, what are you doing specifically? I'll share with you actually that experience was quite a frustrating experience, in part because a lot of the information that is written about ADHD is not actually written by people who have ADHD.
Right.
The sort of who are the keepers of knowledge. So even just something thinking about, you reference that sort of feeling of like less than normal. It's quite often how things like this are described in societies. We describe something as that there's this mythical normal human being, and then other people are supposed to be shades of degrees away from this normal. I don't find that to be a very helpful thought. I don't find that to be, and I would offer that is the primary way that knowledge about ADHD is written. So, my own personal experience, it looked like working with a lot of doctors and asking them for help and realizing they weren't actually sure what that meant, or they'd only really experienced working with it with children, or saying maybe they hadn't actually experienced what it was like working with responsible adults and sort of the particular journey that those folks go through. So it was a lot of trial and error. And then as more and more people asked me what I was doing, I sort of shared those pieces of the journey. And my kind of goal is how could I shorten that path for others so that somebody can find out and say, okay, this now I have an explanation for my life. Things make sense. And I want to shorten that journey of how fast they can actually live into that place where they feel like they're thriving. Doing that also means a lot of work, by the way. I'll share I'll share that I'm not actually a big fan of I think there can be some value early on for people in the sort of, I'll label it the commiseration content on
Hmm.
ADHD and social media. That's actually how a lot of people sort of start seeing and identifying. But there does come a point where we kind of have to move past the commiseration content. We have to move past the sort of, here's 5 quick fixes that should, like, that's rarely actually what we need. We have to do some deeper work. And if we do that work, we can have one set of results. And if we don't do that work, we won't have that set of results. So that was my journey. It was personal. People were asking me about it. And then I started just going back and applying it and seeing the results myself and for with others.
That's terrific. Yeah, I identify with a ton of those emotions that have kind of come up for me over this year, especially. I think the thing that kind of stands in my way most often is the self doubt. I think that I don't fully believe that logically that I can't do certain things, but that voice is a little bit louder. I think for folks like us, that self doubt and feeling like, if I
Sure.
can't be consistent or hold myself accountable consistently, that there's no avenue where I'm going to be very good at the things that I want to pursue or that I'm passionate about. I love that you have kind of homed in on working with leadership and business people as a way in for this type of work. Is there a reason why you've decided to kind of put your focus on ADHD tools, for business people and for entrepreneurs?
Two reasons. One is that there are a lot of, if I look at people with ADHD are disproportionately overrepresented in entrepreneurship. And also, I would offer that it is a way to actually be able to set up the type of environments where we thrive the best. I think the reality of a lot of the corporate spheres are not actually based upon your ideas, how much you're producing. A lot of it's based on how well you fit in. And what I have observed in the past of working with people with kind of 9 to 5 jobs who are exceptional people who have some off the chart strengths and some sometimes off the chart weaknesses is that it doesn't really matter to some extent. There's limits to what they can do because they're not fully able to control that environment. Well, it's different from entrepreneurship. We can actually arrange the type of world and space around us to really meet our needs. And so that is what I prefer to do. And the other piece, just very directly, is that if you're a business owner, the ROI is off the charts.
Mm,
If you are a person who is a brilliant graphic designer, brilliant web designer, brilliant doctor, and maybe you struggle a little bit when it comes to getting in the invoices, the ROI of addressing these problems and addressing them quickly and in an intensive way is higher. So that's part of it as well, is that I wanted to create a journey where I wanted to create a place where we could work at that level of intensity of figuring these things out in a business context.
I definitely agree with being in the corporate environment. I've been with a company for 7 years, which is actually the longest I've ever been with a single company. Before that, it was always about a year, maybe a year and a half before I kind of jumped ship. You got that kind of imposter syndrome sneak in and feel like, well, I've done a pretty good job here. Let me jump ship and start over fresh so that I've got that grace period to, make mistakes and kind of not let people catch on that maybe I'm not that great at this. And I think that I've always been really great at masking and being that person in the corporate environment that people can come to and feel like they can speak to me in a way that's not super buttoned up. And I've always
Right,
loved being
right.
that kind of person within the culture. And I think that that's how I've been a really additive person, and it's taken a little bit of the focus off of the deficits that I have, which are organization. My style is organized chaos. So I'm really curious about the tools that you kind of teach or the
Sure.
environments that you kind of foster in
Yeah.
order for people like us to thrive.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I teach is very much just based on what holds us back. I don't think that there's a single what is sort of the myths about ADHD is that there's a single thing that I recall believing this, that there's a single thing that holds us back. And I thought, okay, great, I'll go to the doctor and I'll get a pill that undoes that thing, and then I'll be fine and my life is awesome. And then discover that's not actually how any of this works. So
Sure.
here's, in my experience, what actually holds us back, and then I can speak to some of the tools. So some of the things that hold us back are neurology. That's absolutely true. There's a tendency, and I do think the word tendency is important. There's a tendency of how our brains might develop. Tends to be the case. We tend to have off the chart skills and areas sort of our the pathways around creativity, problem solving, big picture thinking, off the chart skills in those areas. And it might be true that there's some other areas such as impulse control, higher level planning that are perhaps underdeveloped compared to others. But the thing about this area and how the tools apply here is that when it comes to things that are related to our brain and our neurology and our tendencies, all of these things, like if you think of how plastic the brain is, these are actually things that can be developed. You can develop the underlying areas of the brain around impulse control, around frustration tolerance. These are all things with repetition we can strengthen. ADHD might be a tendency of how a brain develops, but it doesn't mean that there's not active things we can do to compensate our weaknesses. Another thing that might hold us back are the learned behaviors of ADHD. And I would offer that for adults who go most of their life without knowing, primarily the learned behaviors are, I would argue, usually the thing that holds them back more than the actual neurology themselves. So learned behaviors are things like this. Learned behaviors can be things like rejection sensitivity, can be things like perfectionism. Maybe we've had the experience in life where we go all out on an idea and now, we tell everyone we're doing it and then we struggled with the follow through. We didn't understand why we struggled with the follow through. And we're left with that thought, and then we think, oh my God, I best not tell anyone. We start playing life small. Those are some of the learned behaviors.
Yes.
And the thing about learned behaviors, or maybe we doubt our capability at some point to be consistent. But the thing about learned behaviors is all learned behaviors can be unlearned. So there's something that's very tangible and doable. Those can be some of the tools. How do we unlearn learned behaviors? Another set of tools are around burnout. What's very common for adults with ADHD is that particularly responsible adults, you probably didn't make it this far just having things drop on your plate and say, oh, well, that's just how it is. You probably did a lot to try to stop those balls from dropping.
Hmm.
You might be going through life kind of with the emergency brake on, trying to work at 150% capacity in your brain, just trying to get the other things done. And that way of working, it works well maybe it worked well in your 20s. Maybe it worked well in your 30s. And at some point it stops working. At some point you can't just pull the all-nighters. You can't just drink 12 cups of coffee in a day. And at some point, that level of stress that we're putting on the nervous system reduces our cognition, which also reduces all of our executive functioning. But again, burnout, that description I just gave, which is caused by trying to go through life with the parking brake on, if we learn skills to take the parking brake off and not have to tax our brain at 150% the capacity to do the same amount of work as others, we might find that our cognition improves, our memory improves. And
Yeah.
maybe the final thing in how these tools apply is related to just finding ways that work better with us. So it's very similar to going through life, being left-handed and not understanding that there is such a thing as left-handed.
Mm.
And so we try strategies that work for others and they swear up and down the strategy works well for them. You eat that frog. Just all you got to do is, if you had enough motivation, you would just do it. And we're like, great, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do that. And it doesn't work. We can get into this trap of thinking, oh my God, well, if everything I've tried doesn't work, then it must be me. I must be this fundamentally broken person. And then if we just learn different ways of working that actually work for people like us, we might actually discover that our whole life opens up in a way just because nobody gave us the tools in the same way of, nobody gave us left-handed scissors.
Absolutely. Wow. I relate to pretty much everything that you said there. I mean, there's so much of that all or nothing mentality. And then on top of that, seeing other people perform it in a certain way and feeling like you need to conform to that, it only kind of compounds that shame or guilt that you have that you're not able to keep up because they're operating in a very specific way. And I also really resonate with this idea of being able to skate by in your 20s and 30s, but this added pressure being, again, it compounds on you and it just doesn't work anymore. And I definitely feel like I've recognized that more so now that I'm in my 40s.
Mhm.
And, that burnout is 100% real. So I'm definitely curious about those
Yeah.
things that we can do that are, realistic things that you can approach for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, so just in terms of what is realistic, so something I do with our folks is at the beginning of our journey of working together, I have people do a fairly comprehensive assessment of all of their areas of executive functioning, of like what's holding them back in terms of prioritization, task paralysis, execution. I have them rate of how blocked they are on a scale of 1 to 10. And it is frequently true that over a period of 12 weeks that we can get those sort of blockers down where we have almost none of the 9s and 10s, and we can operate at levels of that are very similar to neurotypical peers, but a lot of it comes from that idea that we have to actually chip away at those 4 specific areas. We can't just resolve. We can't just resolve like, you know what, I'm going to have time awareness. Going forward tomorrow, I'm going to have time awareness. That's not a thing that works. So if we've had that experience over and over again of where I think a lot of people get stuck is they say, okay, I'm going to get my stuff together. I'm gonna get a planner. I'm gonna stick with it. But of course,
I'm
if you
gonna
don't
go to
have
the
time
gym.
awareness, yeah, I'm gonna go to the gym. But if you don't have time awareness, the
Right.
planner's not gonna work. So you actually have to work on that in a very structured way. And I would offer the best way to actually learn how to do that is to actually copy people who have done it before, that there is a path to follow. It's not to follow people who don't have ADHD, but feel free to, feel that they're qualified to speak about it. It's not, and it's not. My apologies to my newly diagnosed ADHDers who go out and start TikTok accounts, but admittedly, it's also not following a lot of that content of
Yeah.
like we need to actually follow people who've gotten through some of these things and have turned that into a strength. Because I think there's also many examples of brilliant entrepreneurs, brilliant minds that if we look at them closely, we realize I think they're one of us as well.
Yeah.
We just have to figure out certain things that we have to do.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone who feels that their ADHD is holding them back in their career?
Yeah, I would treat it. I would treat it as something that they need to make a decision about overcoming. That we need to spend almost all of our time resolving that we are going to work on the root causes and not symptoms. We might have gone all of our life trying to work on a symptom. So a symptom can be something like, I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. What's a planner to make me feel less overwhelmed? Working on a root cause is something like, how can I increase my capacity for focus? That's a root cause.
Hmm.
And then until we make that shift of not looking for the quick hack, not looking for the quick solution, but resolving to work on root causes. Like, it's not, I wish it was the sexy, I really wish I had sexy advice that was like, all you got to do is you do these 5 things. It's this quick tip, but there's some things in life that aren't really a quick tip. There's some things in
Yeah.
life that, require a bit to deconstruct.
Do you think that
Like
that's
neurodivergent burnout is pretty serious as an
for
example.
sure? I mean, do you think that's
Yeah.
a major deterrent for people with ADHD? I mean, they realize that the way to actually kind of combat some of these struggles is to actually do that work, and there is no real fix. Do you think that's one of the big deterrents for people actually getting their stuff together?
I think that's certainly one of the reasons why it's so important to do it in community,
Yeah.
where you have other examples of people doing the work that you get to see. I was working with the other day. We start all of our sessions with people sharing their sort of wins for a week, and I was working the other day with a woman named Helen who's been working with us for 2 weeks, who's talking about how like she's got in her taxes, that she had a pile of mail that's been sitting there for 4 years that she finally opened up and sort of was finally feeling some of these things changing. And I think it's actually really important if it might be true that if we have a tendency around ADHD of like we might be time blind, so we want to like fix things now. I don't have time to spend 12 weeks to change my whole life. It has to be done in a week. We want to change things now. I might find that hard. That it's really important to surround ourselves with examples of people going through that process because it's not always a linear path. And to keep up that level of motivation, requires sort of a very specific path. It requires flooding ourselves with evidence that actually, if I do the same things others have done, I can have the same result. And maybe the hardest way to try to do it is to sit alone in our house and just try to resolve to be more disciplined. And I'm just going to stick with it. And it feels like, I would just offer, and by the way, I can say that with such precision because that's what I used to do. But I'll just offer that approach hasn't worked for the first 20 or 30 years of your life, and it's unlikely to work this time or next time as well.
I mean, it's so
Like,
interesting to hear you speak on this stuff because, again, I relate to so much of it, and I've always gotten stuck in this trap of I'd rather just do it myself, and so it's a control thing, I think, in part, but it's a fear that I won't bring enough to the table if I find that community. But I agree with you
mm,
that finding your people that really do understand it on a deeper level because they are affected by whatever it is that you're struggling with makes all the difference in the world. I mean, I've heard this concept of body doubling
mhm.
as something that you could try, and I haven't explored that very much yet. But that seems to tie in with the idea of finding people that really do understand to help you along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, body doubling is a good example of one of those tactics
Mm,
that sometimes does work better for brains. And that those types of tactics and tools, I just wanted to draw a distinction about what I'm saying when I say, because what do I mean by working on the root cause? So there's certain tactics that we might adopt. They're kind of like having a crutch. A crutch has value. If I had a knee surgery and I need to be able to walk, a crutch has value. So being able to learn about a tool like body doubling and see, This helps me get out of bed. I can walk around. There's tremendous value of that. I think the challenge that a lot of folks with ADHD might fall into is because they've only ever been exposed to the world of crutches.
Hmm.
They've only ever been, they're just going from one to the other to the other. That fundamentally, the work that we need to do is to kind of, I'm mixing a metaphor now, but we need to strengthen that knee muscle. Yes, it's good to get the crutch to get us moving. Yes, it's good to be surrounded by people who can show us exactly how to strengthen that knee muscle. We're in an environment where there's 5 other people who've gone through the exact same accident, and we're showing that there's examples of how it's possible for us to do it. And it's something like there's just something to like it is a neurological condition, but it's one that can be rewired. And I would offer. I know it's kind of trendy to talk about ADHD as a superpower, and I think that's only part of the truth because I
Hmm.
think that the other piece of the truth is that it probably doesn't feel that way if you've never actually figured out how to overcome some of the pieces that are more like kryptonite that might be
Sure.
holding you back.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we should have people be reaching out to you for ADHD tools. But what are some practical first steps that somebody could take right now to get started with this kind of mentality?
Yeah, so the number one thing I would suggest is to make a resolution, and that resolution is this, that from this day forward, I am only going to work on root causes. And if I piece together those root causes, in the same way if I was diabetic, what would I do? I'd probably say, okay, there's something I can overcome. I'm going to learn what I need to do. I'm going to manage it, and then I'm going to be fine. And then I can lean into all those strengths. So it would be resolving that there are no more quick fixes, that at the end of the day, I went through the first 30, 40 years of my life not understanding this, but now I do.
Yeah.
And then I probably went through that period of looking for every quick hack. And if I only found the notebook that had the right color, have I just not found the right app yet? Am I using the wrong colored sticky note? We've tried that. That's working on the symptoms. So for what I would offer going forward, it's the unsexiest advice I could imagine. I wish this was called ADHD magic pill tools because that'd be easier. But what I
No,
would
no,
offer is we gotta do the root causes.
yeah, absolutely. No, I completely agree. I'm always searching for the next step and the quick hack. So I love hearing all of this because I agree 100% with you. You've got to kind of do that hard work. So what's next for ADHD tools at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, at this point, we're working with about 600 entrepreneurs a year. Our revenue is approaching 8 figures. We have a team around the world, and what we're doing is just getting really refined at the one thing that we do very well. How can we shorten this journey? How can we sort of find a way that both people are able to live with balance, get through the burnout, but also find, an ROI? And I'm very dedicated at the moment. The thing that's next is like, how can I keep shortening that journey, tightening that explanation, and building that sort of place that I wish existed of when I learned that I had ADHD and wanted to go about it of like, could there be a place where, you come in, you get the help you need with the learned behaviors, with the burnout, all of those places, so you can finally lean into all of those strengths and talents that we kind of know are in there, but we might be hiding from the world because we
Absolutely.
feel like we've wanted to give up.
And so then where do you hope this conversation around ADHD in the workplace and leadership goes maybe in the next few years?
Sure. I mean, what I would love is to break. I'd really love to break from a very pathologized view of ADHD, very pathologized view of autism, ADHD as well, of just understanding that there are a diversity of human experiences in the world. And it is true whenever there's an aspect of human diversity that is in a minority, it's the very first thing we tend to do is we tend to pathologize it. We tend to look at things in terms of normal and abnormal. And what I would love to see is a world where we can lean and have those strengths valued. And I'm realistic enough to think I'm not entirely sure that that's going to happen in the larger world in anytime soon. And so, what I would offer, particularly for the business owners I work with, is like we have that choice of creating our own environment. What if we created that own environment around us where we are able, in a corporate world, could I get out of, doing all of the boring things that drain my energy and I wasn't good at? No, I was forced to do all of those things. In entrepreneurship, I can build systems and teams around me where I spend all of my day operating in my zone of genius. And if we can do that, if we can like lean into that zone of genius, like there might be a whole other sort of second life waiting in front of you that where you haven't been able to access those things only because you've
Yeah.
been. placed in environments
there's
that
so
don't
much energy being
don't allow
expended
for
on
it.
those things that you struggle with, so it's
Sure, yeah,
freeing that up to actually put the focus on the areas where you
yeah,
really are gonna thrive. Super important. I love all this, Ezra, I really appreciate it. I'd love to ask you a couple of really quick rapid fire, just
sure.
fun questions.
Alright,
So
let's go.
what's one tool or app or hack, even though we've been talking about eliminating those simple hacks,
Yeah,
something that personally that you can't live without. These are something that you use all the time.
yeah, it is I'm gonna give the simplest of all hacks, which is it is a stopwatch. And I have a daily practice that looks like similar like this, is that every day I start my day, the very first thing that I try to do, I set a timer for 1 minute, and I try to do that 1 minute of work with intense, unbreakable focus just for 1 minute. And then what I try to do, what I encourage people to do next is to see, can I do 2 minutes? Can I do 3 minutes? See what you can get to your personal best. I'll say that that's my most commonly used tool. And just to share, that is part of like the great thing about a tool like this. Again, it's not sexy. There's no flashing lights and rewards and timers and dingers and
Yeah.
things like that. But the thing that it allows us to do is to consciously work on developing the parts of our brain related to focus, executive functioning. We start chipping away at sort of those learned behaviors because we get to see that actually I can bring myself into work for 1 minute. I could do that. I
Yeah.
could do 2 minutes. I could do 3 minutes. Build our belief. So it's a very unsexy thing, but I would definitely say that the stopwatch. All
Yeah,
right.
I love that too. I mean, starting small is super important, and our brains are so plastic. The neuroplasticity, of you really just training yourself in those small bite-sized ways, and then letting that compound over time, so that it becomes easier, and teaching yourself basically that you can do this for this small amount of time, and then continue to graduate up from that. That's great. That's great advice. Is there a book or a podcast or a creator that really inspires you right now?
Yeah. Yeah. The person who was the biggest inspiration for me, even on this journey, was Seth Godin.
Oh,
Seth Godin had written, occasionally has spoken about his experience as somebody with ADHD. I'll share with you that that was sort of when I had that realization that Seth Godin was one of us. Suddenly, all of his past work came together. And for me, I would suggest a very specific book I read that was really helpful for me was reading the book Lynchpin. But I would just encourage folks to maybe to Google some of the podcasts where Seth Godin has talked about his ADHD. That's one of my most enlightening experiences as an adult and understanding myself.
that's great. Yeah, I know of Seth Godin. I don't think I've read any of his stuff, but I'm definitely aware of him. I didn't know that he had ADHD also. What's one thing ADHD helps you do better than most other people, in your opinion?
Yeah, creativity, problem solving, big picture thinking. My big thing is I can look at a series of options in front of me and I know exactly the one that is going to move the needle. And I'm fortunate because in my business, I can't really hire there's no store where I can buy people like that off the street who have that skill. But I can hire lots of people who can help me with the stuff that maybe I'm not so good at, a lot of the repetitive actions. For me, I love the fact that I have these off the chart strengths in the very areas that also make me likely to be more successful as a business owner.
I love that. That's phenomenal. I had one other quick question for you and want your perspective on it. I get a lot of brain fog, and I feel like that's something that's more recently affected me, and it's very
Yeah.
frustrating. I wonder what your take on that is, and how somebody could kind of push through that or help themselves to deal with it.
Sure. Okay.
That kind of like
Hashtag
mid-sentence losing, the thought
you
or
bet.
the thread,
You bet. Okay. Hashtag not medical advice. Don't
Yeah, of
seek or
course.
not seek medical attention based on what I'm saying. But I'll share with you that that is a very common symptom of neurodivergent burnout. So people with ADHD and neurodivergent burnout often experience things like challenges with word finding. They remember a time in their life that they used to be more articulate. Now the words aren't quite coming out of their mouth. They might feel the brain fog. They might feel that things are slowing down. And I will share with you that it can get pretty severe because it
Mhm.
becomes a bit of a vicious cycle. As somebody who's not willing to let the balls drop, you push through it. You push through it. You push through it. You push through it. In pushing through, our cognition declines. When our cognition declines and our word finding declines and our clarity of thinking declines, we make more mistakes. What do you have to do in that? You push through again. It can lead to a vicious cycle to the bottom. The thing that changes everything is breaking that cycle. Fundamentally, how do we break that cycle? It's not just about, okay, I need a vacation for a week. Because the reality is you're going to come back from vacation, you're going to be the same person who had all of these challenges. The thing we have to do, and again, this is one of those root causes things, we have to figure out how to lift that parking brake. We have to figure out how to get things done in a way that doesn't require that pushing energy, that stress, that chaos. Because, putting stress on ourselves might have been a strategy we learned worked in our 20s and 30s. And eventually, the thing that it leads to is we may age is the brain fog, is the word finding, is those types of challenges. So the type of thing you're describing, hashtag not medical advice, is a pretty common thing that I see in a lot of folks that we work with, but it's something, again, that we can work through. We can learn how to get out of burnout.
That's terrific, man. It's really, really great advice and great insights, Ezra. I really appreciate you joining me today and the work that you're putting into the ADHD community. I certainly appreciate it. I'm sure that people listening that are affected by ADHD will as well. Conversations like this remind us that ADHD isn't just about, something to manage. It's something that can unlock resilience, leadership, and creativity when we lean into it. So to my listeners, be sure to check out ADHD Tools on Instagram and the ADHDtools.com. And as always, you can find more episodes of Mental Notes with Matt at mentalnoteswithmatt.com. Thanks so much for listening. And thank you, Ezra, so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.